So the screening, We Almost Lost Bochum, which began yesterday, available for streaming, and is available until Sunday evening. It's part of the Goethe-Institut North America's film series called Shaping the Past on Demand, and that explores ways in which we cinematically shape and interrogate, rethink history and memory and these relationships. And the project Shaping the Past, or Gestaltung der Vergangenheit, is a project of the Goethe-Instituts and the Goethe Pop-Ups in North America, which includes Canada, USA, and Mexico. And it connects with and builds on the work of emerging leaders of local, national, and transnational movements to remember through reflection and with urgency. And it's a partnership between the Goethe Institute, the Monument Lab in Philadelphia, and the Federal Agency for Civic Education, or the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, BPB. And so, yeah, and it was really fun to be able to, as the film person in Washington, to be able to facilitate this film series that we have under this umbrella. And it's been great to kick off this series with We Almost Lost Bochum. In case you have not watched the film yet, once again, make sure that you do watch the film. It is a great documentary. It is available until Sunday evening, and it has English subtitles, so we would really recommend if you decide that you want to watch something that is not CNN, please do so and give yourself a break and check out a cool doc. And so thank you so much to also my colleague Lena Jung here also in DC for helping me behind the scenes with tech. And thanks once again to Benjamin and Julian, and also to Pahel for joining us today in this conversation. And for anybody who's tuned in, just so you know, tech-wise, if you would like to participate in the Q&A, which I would really love for you to do, and we would love to take any questions, comments that you have. Down on your little control panel at the bottom, you have the speech bubbles, the 2 speech bubbles that say Q&A, and so that's where we'll be fielding questions. And you also have the chat function, which if you would like to use the chat function to make any comments or responses, you are welcome to do that as well. But if you would really like to see a question that all of us, all of the panelists can see, please submit that to Q&A, because that's the quickest way to find it. And I have prepared some questions for our guests, and so I thought I would just go ahead and get started. So my first question that I have regarding We Almost Lost Bochum is really just a question about, so Benjamin, Julian, I've read about how you all came to be documentarians, and that this is your first, this is your debut documentary. And as somebody who has often understood debut novels, films, CDs or albums, you know, like it seems like something that you wanted to do for a long time. It's often the thing that was sort of bubbling under the surface for many, many years until you finally got around to do it. You both are Julian, you are a journalist. You've worked as a journalist, correct? And then Benjamin, you are a producer, editor, and you have worked in that field for a while. And so it seemed like both of you, having worked within the music industry, it seemed like only a matter of time before you arrived at making this documentary about AG. And so my question to you would be, how did you necessarily come to make this documentary? How did you transition from what you were doing before into making this documentary?
Right. First of all, Raleigh, thank you so much for giving us this platform and the invitation, because not just for you, like for us as well, it is kind of a little bit of a breather from constant CNN, not just in the US, but also over here. Like we're pretty much like constantly, very anxiously looking after what's happening in the US. So this is great. Thank you very much. You just said how we transitioned into becoming documentarians, and I'm not sure if that is even the case, because this really was for both of us really like a vanity project, something that was happening on the side during our holidays, on the weekends, after work, kind of thing, pretty much. So we never really took a decision, like took a stand to really like say, now we want to focus on this, but we basically just did it. And it just happened to end up this 100-minute feature-length documentary. I don't think we really planned on having that like in the end as an end product when we started 4 years ago, did we?
No, when we started out, it was more like let's have a look what we can do. We always we've been friends for almost our whole lives now. We knew each other from school, lived together in an apartment, so we're like flatmates, and always wanted to do something together and something on our own. So this was the starting point. And Julian pitched a lot of ideas all the time, and he just had the right one with making a documentary about RAG, because the first time he proposed the idea, it was like, oh yeah, this really could work, but we didn't know it was going to be a 100-minute documentary movie. So we just started out filming, and by the time it got more and more serious, and we developed the film with every day that we shot, and there was sometimes a lot of time between shooting scenes. Mm-hmm. And so after every shoot, it was like, okay, we got to rethink this thing. And so it developed further and further. And at some point, it got so serious that we also had the responsibility to the people who participated in the movie to really get this done and get this done right.
Yeah. But I mean, in general, it can be said that when Benjamin and I, we grew up in a very similar situation in basically tiny villages right next to each other, and that's not far from where Pahel and his friends made music, and that was like the music that we heard when we were 14 years old. So you could say that this has been like
long time
20 years in the making, yeah. Pretty much.
And that's interesting because that sort of ties in well with Pahel and sort of the way that your career came about, because, you know, Benjamin and Julian, you've described the way that, you know, you didn't set out to make a great debut documentary. It was something that you were working on as you were doing other things that you had to do to pay the bills and just live your lives so that you could, make a living. And then you arrived here, and watching the documentary and hearing from Pahel and from Mr. Wiz and from Afro, it sounds also very similar, where it was like, you know, we were just bouncing around, like having fun, because we loved to make music and we loved to rap, we loved to write, we loved to make beats. And then the next thing you know, we have formed this group, or we've jumped around between little groups, duos, trios, you know, and then the next thing you know, we're RAG, and we have this great debut album, Unter Tage. And Pahel, I was wondering, you know, I mean, we do see how that album comes to be in the documentary, but I was wondering if there was anything that maybe we don't see that you would like to add about how you sort of arrived at your debut album with RAG.
Yeah, that's interesting that you see it like that, because it really was like that. We didn't, I mean, like, in terms of thinking, okay, we want to be professional musicians, it really was like, we really, all of us always had the approach to, if we do create something, it has to be something, some of quality. You know, one of our principles, the principle of the group is to rather, you know, put quality over quantity in our work, right? So rather make one song that like where all boats are tight, you know, and then to make like 20 and then later on see if one of them works, you know, like a lot of people do nowadays, but we approach it differently. And it wasn't like the approach was not to, it wasn't a professional approach, but not in terms of we want to make money with this. It was always, the approach was always to make professional, to make the, to present our art form in the most professional way possible. And I think that's what set us apart at that point from most people, most approaches in the hip hop. Back then it wasn't an industry, but in the hip hop community of those days, because we were like keen on our styles and like that everything was like really had some value to it and was, you know, like perfectionism is like our key, while other people were like, oh, we need a topic to just make some song, you know, to jump around, like, you know,
Jump around.
to make hip hop, you know, to make hip hop in Germany, like, you know.
Yeah.
And we were like, we already arrived there, and then we were like, okay, got to be the best outcome possible, you know, present ourselves. So that's in that way, it's really very similar to what the guys were doing with the movie.
Yeah, and
We
that is
already know what they're doing, and
Just add one thing about that time that really interested us in doing this movie was to kind of display this shift from having a hip hop community that was fledgling and on the rise, but had not really yet connected with the larger industry. Because that kind of clash, you can see that in every kind of genre. Whenever that happens, a lot of like crazy dynamics happen, and that was really our main focus on the whole thing. Was like, what we, you know, obviously we're great fans of ARG, and then this band means a lot to us. But also, it was just like a great band for us to illuminate, and then thereby forming this narrative of like how hip hop and the music industry kind of came together. And that's exactly what Pahel just said. Like, you know, there was at that point there was one band called Fettes Brot. They're still like big pop rap stars who
Dickes
had a
Bay.
single out. Like, yeah, like in 95, 96, they had one single, and that was so successful that they had to take it down from the, like they didn't sell it anymore because they were so afraid of the backlash from the scene that they are now like sellout. Like that's the time that we wanted to kind of focus in on and see like what were you guys thinking? Like what was happening at this in this like 2, 3, 4 years that also ARG did their debut album.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention that because I do think, you know, with a lot of with a lot of genres, there's that pull between what you would call the underground or the indie and then the industry. And then once you cross over or once something you've done is commercially successful, there's that fear that you see of selling out. And the first thing that came to mind was that huge international hit from 2007, Gnarls Barkley, "Crazy," which I remember they pulled that song out of like iTunes and everything because they were afraid people would get sick of it, and people were still wanted it, and that just reminds me a little bit of the of that sort of conflict which you guys highlight really well, both as the filmmakers and Pahel and Afro and Mr. Wiz um, as the interviewees, sort of pulling out that struggle where it's like you're rising to fame from an underground scene, and then you're popular or you're successful, and then the pressure to keep delivering, and you tease that out very well, I think. And I was thinking also about the role of, for instance, commercial viability in music. And I thought one thing that I thought was great about AAG is the lyrics, of course, they're all or almost all in German. I was going to touch a little bit on the use of language a little bit later, but you know, that you all rap in German, which is you know, I mean, rap being something that you know, primarily originates from the United States, it's debatable, but a lot of English language rap or a lot of popular music in general being in English, and the idea that you should be singing or rapping in English if you want to be commercially viable. And that decision to not do that is such a great statement of like, no, we're doing this because we want to express ourselves in German. And I was thinking, what is it, Pahel, I think this would be a question that would be for you. What is it about expressing yourself in German versus any other language that you can speak that said, this is the language I want to rap in, and I don't care whether it's commercially viable or whether other people can understand it, and if they don't, maybe they don't want to buy it. It's about what I want to say, and I want to say that in German. What do you think about that sort of tendency?
yeah. So me personally, I started off rapping in English, and but there's so many great examples for rap in English. That you know, if that's not your native tongue, you will reach that barrier where you're not going to be able to, you know, speak out what you just processed in a different language. And it just, some people, like for example, since the guys are from Cologne, there's a good example. There's this guy, gentleman, who's, excuse me, there's a helicopter right now.
This is typical DC.
Yeah. So there's a good example for doing it the other way around. Like Gentleman, for example, he started off making professional music about the same time we did, but he did it all in English and even in Patois, you know. And he was big in Jamaica, like in the late 90s already, you know. I actually was in Jamaica and heard them on the radio praising one of his singles as the hardest thing out there, which to this day sometimes have a hard time believing that it really happened. But it's like, for me personally, it was like, I didn't feel like me and Afro, for example, we always like, for us it was like a hobby to decode the Ebonics that were in like in the rap songs that we were listening to. And that was like kind of like how we understood the culture more. While some people just scratched the surface, they were just like, okay, or breakdance, or just put on some white gloves and that's it. You know, we would go and like, with everything, with DJing, graffiti, whatever, we would go and see like, how do they really do this? What is really meant by this term? What is this? What does this mean? Who's connected? Why are these guys beefing and whatever, right? So that's how we got that deeper understanding for hip hop, that if you just scratch the surface, you will just like, you know, see it as a gimmick, which a lot of people to this day do. They just copy like whatever is like the trendiest type of beat, and then they make the same thing and transfer it, you know, translate it into German, and it works. Commercially, it works. Like, you know, it's the sad part, but also it's fine for them. But for me personally, it was like, if I want to say something and I want people around me to understand it, you know, and use it as like a vehicle to, you know, change my environment, to find my place in that environment, and also like to express my part of society, I can only do it in German, because I was aware that other Germans didn't understand the hip hop culture like me and Wiz or Afro or Gala did, because they would just hear some catchphrases, but they didn't take the time like we did to really understand that culture. So for us to make that, to translate, because we didn't invent hip hop, we didn't invent German rap, we just translated the American culture into our culture, and that made our form of hip hop, and that's what gave us the credibility that we have to this day, because we didn't fake anything. We are very aware that we are just, you know, very inspired by an art form that's already was fully in existence. We just use the techniques of rap in our own language, and I think there were other people before us, like Advanced Chemistry did that, you know, Torch, Linguist, and Tony L. They were like big role models for us, and also on the industry more successful mainstream level, there was this group called Die Fantastischen Vier, which is also in itself like, even they were hip hop too, right? But they were the first, yeah. But they were the first ones to really take advantage of using that concept to make money, right? Because like, if you think about, for example, Die Fantastischen Vier, it's a typical thing in hip hop, like Furious 5, right? Die Fantastischen Vier, like to have that superhero idea. They did exactly what American rap groups did, you know, and they don't get credit, especially from people like me, because, you know, they did the opposite of what we did, but they were essential for the rise of German hip hop. Actually, the first song that I've heard from somebody else in German, I was rapping in German, but the first song I heard from somebody else in German and on the radio was a song by Die Fantastischen Vier, which is on no album of them. It's called Golf GTE or something like that. You can't find that song anywhere, but it was all one day. It was on the on German radio station. I was like, what? they're putting this on the radio already, you know. So yeah, and it is interesting, but it was necessary, and I think that when you first heard like songs like Kapitel 3, Kapitel 1 by Torch, or you know these songs about Der Grüne Pass, you know, like then that's like when you were like, okay, we really have to do this, we really have to do this in our language, and that's at the starting point. And nowadays, like everybody's doing it in Germany.
Just from a fan perspective, so when RG came out with their debut LP, I was 12 years old and Benjamin was 13, I guess. You guys didn't rap in a form of German that was easily accessible to everyone. It was like so coded and so layered and poetic in a way that I remember like the same year I got Wu-Tang Forever and Unter Tage, and I pretty much understood the same amount of like a word here, a word there, but I had no idea. I didn't even know it was like West Wind, you know, basically a ganja song. I didn't understand that was like a smoker's anthem. I just thought it was like.
I understood that.
Yeah,
And
sure.
that's what we took from the culture here, like that to not like just use the, you know, like everybody can talk about any topic like in a blatant way, you know, just saying something, but like to code code what we wanted to say, like that was like we took this from here. Like people were talking about drug deals and so on all these rap records, and they were just using terms like, you know, if you don't decode it, you don't know what they're talking about. And that we use the same recipe to make our music, you know?
And it is interesting, you know, the way that you guys talk about language, because, you know, in watching, I thought that both as the filmmakers and also as the artists, there was this really great sort of hybridity you see between English and German. And also then you mix in dialect, and it even becomes even more interesting and more complex, because I saw often, of course, in the scenes where you have performance, or when you hear Age's music, you do hear English. And as somebody who is a native English speaker, I do come from, you know, and from the DC area, and also has a background, you know, like partially Afro-American background, and has been speaking that slang for my whole life. It was one of those things where it's like, they used that word right. You know, you're like, there was literally no, like, it was sort of a seamless blend of German and sort of hip hop lingo that you don't really, that could very easily have gone chief, or, you know, that could very easily have gone awkward, but it didn't feel that way. And then also I found it even more remarkable the way that when you all were capturing the guys as they were talking in interviews, that they did that as well. They would seamlessly transition into, like, they would use the word flow, or they would use the word realness, words that they would just go right into it from the German that they were speaking, and it felt like. And so I guess my question would be, like, do you feel like in hip hop, especially in German hip hop, because of this transatlantic sort of existence between, and this thing that transcends language, that almost like there's a new hybridity that's been established in the way people speak and the way people communicate, sing, because it's not just in German and it's not just English, it's its own thing. And I don't want to get all into homie baba and academia, but it.
I think that's not only in Germany, but I've seen it in Germany happening first, and I see it in Brazil, for example. Now, I followed the Brazilian hip hop scene like since the mid '90s, and they are like 10 years behind Germany in their development, right? But now they also caught up in also like even Korean or Japanese, like De La Soul. They had like Japanese rappers on one of their first albums already, right? And they were flowing and everything. So for what is interesting for me is this thing that we were talking about, like decoding, or that I talked about earlier, decoding Ebonics, which is like the main language in rap, the early rap songs. Like that was a hobby of us, and only our tightest circle would understand really what we were talking about, you know, and what it means, the meaning behind it. Like you said, that you applying terms the right way. You know, somebody would say, "Oh, flow, blah, blah," but don't know what really is meant by that, right? But now, like 25, 30 years after, like, or 30 some years after German hip hop really got on the tracks, I'm surprised. Like if I'm in Germany, like I was in Berlin a while ago, and there was like a 70-plus-year-old lady talking to some kid on the street. Like, willst du mich dissen? Like, I mean, this, you know, is I mean, and that's hip hop is responsible for that. People like us are responsible for the next generation using terms that you were like surprised. Oh, they use these terms already like in 96, 98 or whatever. Well, that back then we were the only ones using those terms, but the next generation for them it was already normal. Now it's like everybody in Germany uses English terms, right? In Germany, like and Brazil is also is similar because the music has taken over so much, and it's not that long ago that almost no Brazilian would speak fluent English. That's a big thing. Like the last 20 years, everybody's trying to learn English. Everybody's trying to come to the States and so on, right? So, and they use a lot of, like we say in German, Anglizismen, right?
Yeah,
And
Anglicisms. Yeah.
it's more and more in Brazil. In Germany, it's normal, but it had been before hip hop too that people use English terms in other fields, right? But even in hip hop, it's more geared toward the music industry, toward whatever gang affiliations or whatever, So we got more that deeper level of it. But in Germany, I think it's a phenomenon after World War II, since everybody had to learn English, or in the East they had to learn Russian, or we had to learn French. We are multilingual anyways, right? So there's those terms will pop up, but so we mix it up, and I think I think the use of like these terms makes our music more soothing to the ear because it's not only German.
Mhm.
It is infused with the original language that's used in hip hop. That makes it more hip hop, I think.
Yeah.
For us, it was really interesting to see that when we were listening to your guys' music, that it still was like a very coded language, and then how it broke into mainstream, like the codes and the words. Like all of a sudden, you had like the Bonduell, der fette Gemüsemix, like the word fat, like from 90s hip hop through groups like AG and all these German rap groups, all of a sudden became this mainstream term for like something good, right? Fett or derbe, like all these things that really came through like a translation of American hip hop to German culture.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say just that specific word. The first time that I heard it, which I'm sure that it was probably. I mean, I wasn't alive for the earliest bits of hip hop in the late '80s. When it really started to take off. But I remembered hearing Eminem Stan when he was saying something about, I heard the stuff you did with Dre, that was fat. I was like 10 years old. I was like, what does that mean? What was fat? But then learning. Yeah, it's almost like learning another, not another language, but a dialect.
But that kind of thing is really like a generational thing. I'm seeing this right now. Like I'm working, I'm helping someone with the translation. I'm basically a consultant on a novel translation right now for a Ta-Nehisi Coates debut novel that's being translated into German. And the translator is like this very esteemed, highly regarded translator. He's in his mid 60s, and like there's things in there, like one phrase like "Shorty's fat to death." Like this is describing this girl like Shorty's fat to death, and then
pH, yeah, pH fat.
yeah, but pH 80, right? And then he's just asking me if that's a death threat. Like no, that actually means that it's this is actually good. This is good.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really a generational thing, and there's no way other than like really digging into a certain subculture, I think, for years and years to really internalize it. Otherwise, you just baffle.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, just as a quick aside, for anybody who is joining us, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A, and we can go ahead and field those as they come through the Q&A. But back to because Pahel, you mentioned your background, and your knowledge about Brazil, and it was interesting to me that Julian and Benjamin, you sort of do a really great job in the documentary of sort of transitioning between all of these different places. I mean, I don't remember that you actually went to Brazil, but Brazil is mentioned. It's very much encapsulated, especially Pahel, in the scene where you go to the basement and you have a Brazilian flag T-shirt on, and you're talking about your father, and bouncing between there and Washington and the South Bronx and all of the different cities in the Ruhrpott, and then Berlin, and then Cologne, and you transition really well visually between these cities using landscape. And I was interested in especially that the way that you do that as it corresponds to the ideas of home, right? Or the idea of where your community is, where your belonging is. And so the visuals that you all use, especially to describe to represent the region of the Ruhrpott, were very industrial, and they were very striking images of just industry. I mean, I don't even know what these things are: rigs, factories, processing plants, and smokestacks, and and you have this really great sort of way of establishing it. And then when you transition to Washington, and then when you transition to the South Bronx, and I was just wondering if you wanted to say anything about sort of how you came to decide that, especially with the Ruhrpott, that skyline was how you wanted to let everybody know, like, this is what this part of Germany is like, which I think a lot of people, unless they are from Germany, they might not know that much about. So I think that there's another layer of that makes it even more interesting.
So yeah, definitely the whole Ruhr area landscape is is famous for looking like this, and we made this decision quite early, I think, because when we filmed some of the interviews, and I think we filmed one concert or something, we were already thinking about the visual concept of the movie, and it was very clear to us that we had to really use these great images that you can shoot in the Ruhr area. So we grew up around the area, not in the area, but around. So we spent a lot of time in the back seats of our parents' cars watching those industry giants just sitting there, and had like school trips there when we were kids. So we knew the area, but we went like scouting for some days. And we very early had the concept that we wanted to make a movie about hip hop, but not like a cliche hip hop movie, not that we see like a train and we hear a beat or something and somebody makes this. So yeah, we wanted to avoid cliches,
Yeah.
And so we thought that this visual style of those industry ruins that are still there, that they could be very well connected with music that is not hip hop. That was very important to us, so that we have like a soundtrack that is very ambient, with a lot of synthesizer sounds. And this we had this very early, but we didn't know if we could realize it. But yeah, then we tried it out and it worked.
But it is like the thing is, the non-cliche thing was really important to us, because we've seen so many, especially in Germany, so many like more high quality or more mainstreamish things trying to depict hip hop in a way that it's always the same formula. So the problem was for us that these landscapes that you see in the film, they are almost a cliche in itself. Like the Ruhrpott, the Ruhr Valley cliche would be pretty much these buildings that we depict, but we wanted to like film them in a way that would make sense for us. So you have all like these shots like from beneath,
from underneath a lot.
Exactly. And a lot of things, a lot of shots from out of the car, which is exactly like you said, how we as kids and as young, teenagers basically got to experience these kind of cities that are connected. That's like the weird thing about the area, is like it's the biggest metropolitan area in Germany, and you can go from one major city to another major city in 7 minutes by car or by train, by metro. You're basically in another city just hopping on the train in 10 minutes. So we wanted to, like, that kind of interdependence between these cities, you wanted to kind of show by having these like endless, drives everywhere, which then, kind of connected it as well a little bit to how I guess Pahel experiences Washington as well, because that's a lot of driving. So you see a lot of
Very
like,
car heavy city.
yeah,
A lot of movement.
you see a lot of movement, yes.
And it's interesting because you talked about, like, this is very much the Ruhrpott, and this is something that you wanted to do because you didn't want it to have typical cliche hip hop documentary visuals. And, I thought about the idea that coming from any storytelling perspective, the way people say, the more specific you get, the more universal the understanding is, because, you showed us very specifically this region, but as a person from the United States, I see that and I think of the Rust Belt of the United States, so Pittsburgh and Ohio and areas where there are other sorts of music like folk, bluegrass, like that have sort of niche, underground. I don't know if there's underground bluegrass, but like, like very special genres that come from these regions. Or, for instance, if somebody from the United Kingdom maybe watches that and thinks of the towns in the Midlands or the North that also are very similar. And I think that it really did a great job in sort of establishing that, where it's like, no, I did not grow up in the Ruhrpott, but I know this region. It's and it's not a region. If it's anything like it is in the United States or in the UK, it's not a region that a lot of people necessarily uh, that people might thumb their nose at, or they might look over, or they might not want to really look that much deeper into, which I found really interesting in the establishment of those visuals. And it's interesting that you mentioned also, the way that in this region you sort of transition almost without noticing, if you're maybe if you're maybe not from the area, between cities because they're so close together. And Pachel, that sort of made me think of the way that you and the other guys would talk about how in fact different these towns were to you. And you would go from one town to another in this region, and everybody had their own flow, everybody had their own way of approaching hip hop, or their own scene. And when you would go to Bochum, like I was thinking about, sort of snobs that I know in Berlin who might go Bochum, but and the way that they have that sort of negative attitude. But the way that people who are from the area, they're like, no, Bochum is where I go to get, where I went as a young person to really be exposed to this. And we had this club logo, and it was where I learned everything about, or where I started to become exposed to this scene, and everything really grew for me. And I thought that was really cool. And I was wondering, um, a lot about hip hop is about sort of repping your hometown, repping your neighborhood, and being proud of that place that you come from. And I was wondering if any of you all wanted to maybe talk about just that, the way that sort of translates over into German hip hop, because of course you do see it very strongly in American hip hop, Chicago, Detroit, all of the different cities. But it's obviously something that's happening in Germany too. And I was wondering if any of you wanted, maybe Pachel, if you wanted to talk about that and how special that is in Germany.
So that's a funny thing, because the name of our group is like a very local patriotic name. Like Ruhrpott is like that's like our term for that region in West Germany, which is like, and the official term is Ruhrgebiet, right? Which also makes up for the good wordplay of Ruhrge with B-E-A-T, right? But Ruhrpott is like, yeah, we kind of we had, when the guys were over here to interview us, we have these very different opinions about how important it is really what region we're from, and how important it is for us to mention that in the name of our group, right? Because on one hand, we don't play at all into the cliches of that specific region with the whole like coal mining, steel processing plants, which where I grew up, you don't get around that. Like ThyssenKrupp, these companies that are still around, that even that made the weapons for Hitler during World War II, by the way, which is remarkable that they're still around.
Now
Like
they
which
make
are,
elevators and
they make
water
elevators,
fountains.
but they also make
Yeah,
parts.
some worse things.
No, but interesting that they're still around anyways. But we we were kind of like trying to represent that region and that, like you said, people who are snobbish looking down on the working class from the Ruhr area, from other parts of Germany. Some of them are not aware that we were blessed with some great minds that were early on in that region, like very aware of what hip hop is for the world. There were a couple of people like, for example, there's a in my hometown was a guy, a writer, Jown was his name. He wrote Joan, and this guy used to travel to Amsterdam, Paris, and so on, so on, way before I started writing. And he brought that original Amsterdam style, the Paris style, and so on, so on. They brought that to Bochum, so we already knew how to really rock letters when other people didn't know how that graffiti was more than just like, oh, you know, use a spray can to write the alphabet, right? So we were way ahead, like in terms of style, and also in rap the same thing. Like, you know, we had a couple people like Mr. Wiz, for example, like, you know, or those from Too Strong, or, you know, other people, DJ Sonic, or so, people who really knew how to use a 12, you know, 1210, you know, use an MK12 turntable or whatever, you know. So we had this early on richness in our culture, but we weren't trying to represent our cities like in terms of what they meant for Germany before. But on the other hand, we use the most patriotic name you can use. Like, you know, it's kind of weird. We weren't trying to represent Ruhrgebiet, but in our name, it's right there. You know, so it's an interesting question. But yeah, but I think we are, even though we're not really trying to present like the culture that was there before, we were really proud to present that we were able to, like, you know, create a new culture in that region.
Yeah.
You know, a new part of German culture from that region, and I think that we wanted to make sure that people know, okay, yeah, it's dope, but it's from Ruhrgebiet. It's not from Cologne. It's not from Berlin. We didn't need to be in Hamburg, Munich. It is right, right from there where you don't think it's from, and that's why we put that in our name too. Yeah.
Yeah, and on that sort of topic of, you know, hometown and community and stuff, Julian and Benjamin, I think you guys in making the film give the guys a really great, especially Pahel and Mr. Wiz, a lot of great space to sort of expand upon their backgrounds and, you know, their identities as people who are Black Germans or who are people just of, for instance, you know, of Afro-Brazilian descent or mixed descent. And it was really interesting to sort of see both Mr. Wiz and you, Pacha, talk about how you went, you know, even though you were born in Germany, or I'm not sure about Mr. Wiz, but, you know, are German and German speaking, um, that you both described going to somewhere else and feeling at home. Like Pahel, you mentioned going to Brazil and saying, this was where I felt at home for the first time. And Mr. Wiz saying that the first time he felt at home was the South Bronx. And, you know, that idea and that moment where you guys are sitting there talking about what it was like growing up Black in Germany and saying, you know, Mr. was talking about people touching his hair without his permission. And, you know, it was really nice to see sort of a more expanded upon discussion of that role of your identity in your stories. And I guess so I was wondering, um, these themes of home and of identity as they sort of overlap, especially with hip hop, and your work as, you know, in German hip hop. I was curious, um, is there what do I want to say? Is there more to, you know, for instance, that identity that you feel like looking back on your career that came forward that maybe you didn't realize that was very important at the time, but now you look back as now that you're older.
So for me, it was one of the crucial motivations to make hip hop, to be involved with reggae music or anything like that, because like there was no, I identify as German because I was born there, but I was as early on was always told like you don't belong, people were like, you're not German, where are you from? So I identify as German because like that's my passport, but the question that you asked about like why do we feel more at home somewhere else? Yeah, just that's exactly the reason. And I think for our music, we like Wiz and me, for example, we made the music out of the same vibe that a lot of people here make it, and I think that pays a lot into the credibility of our group, because we weren't faking the funk. We are like that. We are, and it's like people like I know nowadays, for example, the culture has evolved. Like, for example, French rap. I love French rap. There's this group, Pahel. The father is from Corsica. The mother is, I think, from Northern Africa somewhere. Or I don't know, some Arab country. I don't know. But they are very French. They have like it's like a very, it's French hip hop is like their own cosmos, right? So, but the struggle or this like identity questioning and so on and so on, we have the same feeling that like for example an interview that didn't make the movie is the interview with Blue Black from Unspoken Herd. He's from the Bronx, friend of mine, and he's like we vibed like from when we met, like we grew up in the same neighborhood because we have the same like emotional background, and I think that plays a lot into the vibe of our group, the soul that our group has, and but not to say that like other musicians or people don't have it. Like for example, Afro has a feeling for funk. He spins funk music a lot, like spins soul and all that, and he always had a love for that music because it's great music. You don't have to be black to appreciate jazz or something like that. But I think it plays a role that if you like if you identify with the struggle, or if you have your background in that struggle, it makes it a little bit more authentic. And in our case, it's interesting because like if I speak German, I speak the most Ruhrpott you can speak. Like there are people I can't speak like everybody who like 60-year-old guys who worked at like in a Opel car plant in Bochum, right? Ich kann genauso reden wie jeder andere Assi auch in Bochum, weißt du, ich meine? So halt.
Yeah.
So, but then to pair that with the authenticity of like, my Afro heritage, I think that's the real reason why our music is authentic.
Yeah.
I think that's the real reason for it. And like, there was no, and that's the key for that is like, for us, like Michael, for example, Gala and me, there is no question like if he's like my brother, it's not we were past this discussion of like what we have in the United States right now about this daily black and white stuff, this stuff that leads to this separation and the controversies we have here with these politicians that try to divide the country, right? We were already past that in the 70s in Germany, because Germany had what we have here, this MAGA thing. We had that just behind us. Our parents, they were suffering. They were just done suffering the consequences of their idiotic parents.
Yeah.
And of the bad decisions of their parents. Well, I'm not saying that. Like for example, somebody who votes for Donald Trump doesn't have a reason for that. They think they have a reason for that, but they're wrong. Just like the people who were supporting Hitler because Hitler was giving them work, they were wrong to do what they were doing. They were in a bad economic situation, but then they wanted to conquer the world. So there is a right and there's a wrong. And I think the funny thing is, we come from a time like me and my friends that I used to make music with. We come from a time where people just got up from falling down after thinking they were too great. They were too great, right? For me, it's impressive to see that this country is going in a direction where they're thinking they're going to be too great again.
Yeah.
You know, so. And it's always like, you know, it's not the individual doesn't make the problem. It's the all over, you know. And so for the music, like our music, is not only the influence of Afro Germans, but it's like this friendship of, like, you know, people who understand the music and love it, just like somebody who has like slave ancestry, like me or Gabriel, or you know. You know, Afro, for example, his name, he calls himself Afro, but he doesn't have his great-great-grandmother who was still enslaved, right? He knows that, you know, about the history, but he doesn't feel it like I feel it. But it's, you know, that combined, that's what makes it. And I think, like, it's interesting because I think it's good to be able to have this type of dialogue through music, also as now with Goethe-Institut or whatever, because you can explain so much of what history has shown us and what is about to happen through these constellations and stuff. You know, for me, for example, it's interesting. I would like to be more in dialogue with when I'm in North Carolina, for where my in-laws live, for example. I'm in a dialogue with people who like have Confederate flags on their trucks and all that, right? And when you do that, when you're in that dialogue, you see that there's like there's a reason for all this stuff, right? But and you can always see like the momentum when people understand, yeah, that they are like, okay, yeah, maybe there would be a alternative to the way of thinking that they have, right? And I think that's one thing that we wanted to always accomplish with our music too, to loosen up minds a little.
And I thought it is interesting that you mentioned, for instance, Afro's name, his stage name, because I was thinking, you know, given that his everyday name is Carsten, and that he's a white German, I was thinking, you know, given the way that the country is right now, there are a lot of people who might say, oh no, that doesn't fly. Like, you can't do that. You can't name yourself Afro. And I thought it was interesting that it's like he's naming himself Afro, and he's doing it because, you know, it's a different place that he's coming from, and it's like I'm not doing this to be offensive. I'm not doing this to you know, to make some kind of a statement. It's because it's everybody's taking on these MC names, and he picks Afro. And I just thought about how in today's culture there might be a lot of people with issues with that. I don't know if there may have been people with issues with that in the past, but just yeah, just the way that it's not about necessarily sometimes the use of the language maybe, but just the context and the
I
community.
think it was like out of admiration for the
Yeah.
culture that why he chose that name. And there was this group called Young Black Teenagers in the U.S. Remember? I don't know if you know them, but they were all white too, you know. But I think, like, yeah, in a way, you know, it depends on how you do something like that. If you do it in a respectful way or in a mocking way, you know, like
Yeah.
if there would be a group call themselves the N, you know, whatever, and there would be white MCs, that would not fly right now, you know. But
Yeah.
the way he did, he chose his name because, you know, if you know him, that he did it out of admiration for soul music, basically, right?
Yeah.
So that's the only reason why I never had a problem with it. You know, I was like, this is a cool name. I never really thought about it. It's like I was like, okay, cool, but cool name, you know, good choice.
Yeah. It's that
Yeah,
line sort of between appreciation, appropriation, or exploitation, I guess.
yeah.
It's also
It's
the kind of stuff that you know basically decide when you're 13.
That
On a
too,
record,
yeah.
and I
put
think
out
sometimes he wasn't too happy about it either.
But Pahel, do you remember? Pahel, do you remember? We just watched like the whole extra material, the bonus material that we want to put on the Blu-ray, right? That we want to. And you told the story when we were in your basement. So that the biggest European hip hop magazine was in Germany for a long time, called Juice magazine. and you guys were on the cover of Juice in, I don't know, 2001 or 2002 or something, and you are like bang right in front of the, you know, the band is in the back and you are like clearly in front. And you told us that that was just because the photographer thought, okay, which of these guys is like the main guy? Which one is Afro? This guy must be Afro. Can you come to the front? And we're like, yeah, sure.
That it actually happened a couple of times that people misconceived like who's, you know, because I have like this, you know, I'm like 6'4", right? I'm, you know, I stand out, right? So a lot of times people who like weren't, because we don't have a lot of, like, for example, the album cover didn't show us really. It's like the light comes from the back, whatever, you know. So people don't really know who's who and so and so. And sometimes it happened that people thought I was, you know, because of the name, that I was the other MC. It's
That you were
interesting.
Afro.
That I was Afro. I don't know. It happened. These things happen, yeah. Yeah.
So I had just one more question, Pahel, for you, just going off of the same topic. And then I had, we have a question from Nikki that I thought was a really great question to maybe sort of close out with for Julian and Benjamin. Um, and so, Pahel, my sort of final question to you was that when we have this transition to we have this transition from Germany and we go to Washington, and one of the people who is being featured, I'm sorry, I don't remember which person it was, but he says, "Welcome to Washington, D.C., also known as Chocolate City." And I was so happy to hear that as a D.C. area person and also as a, you know, racial fruit salad, like, you know, to hear called Chocolate City, because it hadn't been called that since this, I hadn't heard that, you know, being described, or my parents referenced it having been used in the 70s and then again in like the 90s and stuff like that. And it really speaks really well to DC as a very, as having a very solid identity as a black city. And I think that a lot of people who look at Washington don't know that, because of course they think of politics and they think of, you know, white presidents, they think of white politicians, and they don't really go into the city and realize that the city is actually majority black folks, and that it is actually that go-go and the history from the 20s to the 60s to the, you know, it just was shaped by black Americans. I would say probably more so than it's been shaped by white Americans in Washington. I mean, when you have gentrification, but you know, it gets messy in there. But so my like sort of other question to you before I went on to taking some Q&A, and then my last questions for sort of everybody was, how do you feel in DC? Like, how was the transition for what from Germany to Washington? Because I do remember you said that, you know, Amsterdam's a beautiful city, Bochum, you know, these, you name a couple of cities, and then you say, you know, so Washington, you know, Washington's a beautiful city too, so why not live here? And I've been here for 13 years, and I thought that was a really interesting take as somebody who came here versus somebody who grew up here. So I
Yeah.
was curious.
So yeah, there are two parts of it. First of all, the person who says it, that's Head Rock, is a very good MC from the out of the DMV. He has a couple albums out. Definitely check him out. And he actually he has this. He calls it Chocolate City Rocks. He used to do events at the Kennedy Center and stuff like that. You know, it's a very, very active artist and good dude, definitely good lyrics, everything. But friend of mine. So he says this because he wants to keep that mark on the city, because, like you said, the gentrification that I've very much so witnessed the last 15 years that I'm here has put a dent into that cultural garden that this has been, right? Because DC, the way I got to know DC was way more black than it is now. And the second part of your question, my answer is like, it ties into what you said earlier. How is it that you feel at home somewhere else more than in Germany? Like, you know, if you're not represented like in a way, like and it's not only the color of your skin, but if you like that, it starts with that. If you are the exception somewhere, and you always like stand out because of the way you look, and then you come to a different place. Like for me, it was in Brazil, because I hadn't been to the States before I first got to Brazil. In Brazil, I'm like the average Joe, right? I look like the average Joe. And now you're like more tranquil, more relaxed because you don't stick out. You don't, get judged on the first look because of your looks and so on. So that's one of the reasons why I felt very much at home here right away. Felt very welcomed. After my wife's family and everything is, great thing. And it's interesting because when we made the movie, the Trump train was already rolling, but it wasn't as bad as it is right now. And before, when I moved here, George W. Bush was in office still, right, for his second term, and I was okay, it's not so good, and but it's better than in Germany, right? And in the movie, I say like, okay, we came here because I don't want my daughter to experience German racism, and a lot of people after the movie ask me now like, okay, so you went to the States to escape German racism now, but in the U.S. it's much worse now, right? Now, that's true that it is worse. It's like having the right wing extremist parties in Germany in office right now. The FAP or the Alternative für Deutschland, which is like a right wing equivalent for the Tea Party. So that would be horrible, and it's true that it's where it's here right now. But let's not forget that we had 8 years of Obama, where the U.S. were like, okay, so we really can get somewhere, we can change, and I hope that this polarization is going to stop soon, because it's a beautiful country, even with the different opinions and different, different cultural backgrounds that have planted themselves here, right? Because Europeans are not the original people on this country. Like, and it's so ridiculous for them to like behave here like this country belongs to them and to them only. It's so far off the truth, and I think that like America can, so for them to really make it this a nice country, it's like to balance it out and like smoothen all these things over instead of like polarizing more. But that's why I felt home here right away, and uh, I really like the idea. Like when Headrock says it, like Chocolate City, like it used to be Chocolate City. And a lot of people don't know this. It's still there, but it's very different nowadays than it used to be. But it's beautiful city still. Yeah, I like
And
it.
another thing I love about that term is that I think originally it was supposed to be kind of an insult, it was like DC's Chocolate City, and then people reclaimed it and they were like, yeah, it is. And it's great, like, and and that kind of reclamation I always find to be really interesting. And so I wanted to go ahead and pose another question to Benjamin and Julian, and then I was going to take Nikki's question about the title, because I thought that would be a nice way to sort of wrap things up. Um, and so my question was first, I guess it's kind of two-part, but one is that you guys do a really great job of blending together existing footage that the guys took from the time that they were actually recording and when they were performing and hanging out just in the studio and stuff like that, and you blended it with footage that you put together. And I think that also speaks really well to other sort of themes that I sort of pulled out from the film about sort of cultures coming together and things mixing, and mixing being, as the and as is the tradition in hip hop, to mix things together and use found things and put it in and make something new out of it. And I was wondering just if you all wanted to say anything about the way you approached that in mixing different kinds of footage, including what you all shot on your own. And then in that point, I was going to loop in Nikki Cochran's question, which is, How did you choose the title We Almost Lost Bochum, and what's that mean?
Start on the
So yeah, for the start of mixing, like the footage, or from the beginning, it was very clear to us that we wanted to have like archival stuff, you know, from the times that the guys filmed themselves or took photos. So we asked everybody all the time, you got something, and yeah, the tapes came dripping in one by one, and in the end it was about, I think, 12 tapes that came like from every corner, like Pahel when he was in Germany for the concert that is the final of the movie. He gave us like I don't know how many gigabytes of photos that he collected over all those years. That was like a really big treasure. And so it was very clear to us, because that's what we love about documentaries, you know, like to jump into the time that you document and to experience it by this way. And another very nice aspect was that all this stuff was filmed by Michael Galler, the band member that has passed away. And so we can experience all this time through his lens. He's like, the director of photography in this scenes, you know. He
has a presence, even though
he's a presence. He's behind the camera. He's so he has, like, he cannot say anything right now in person, you know, but he gets to form the narrative as well through having filmed all the time. And I think what you mean with like that, it's maybe like a hip-hop thing to mix and sample and reinvent. It's I think the whole way we approached making the movie is kind of hip-hop, you know.
Yeah.
Because it was like a do-it-yourself thing. We did it because we loved it, because we wanted to do something together. And it's I think the first version we had when the movie was finished, we showed it to the guys, you know, so that they could see it before anyone else could see it. And Pahel said, you know, I think it's an unusual movie, but you know, our album was a very unusual album, so I think it matches pretty well. And this was like a really great what you say,
it's a great,
it was very nice.
It's a great feedback for us, because like, as much as we didn't want to make a stereotypical hip-hop movie, we were very like aware of, we don't want this to, because the topic is so innately underground hip-hop, right? We wanted it to look like different and feel different, of course, and then kind of we can contextualize the whole thing that we are portraying. But then on the other hand, pretty much everyone was like giving us some pointers, like how our project was like what they did. Like when we talked about the label, Put a Needle to the Records, another very 90s name, that released the first record by AG. The guy who ran the label was also like, I just like went and did it, pretty much like you did the movie. We're like, yeah, but your label completely fell apart. It's like, yeah, just be careful. So that kind of approach was really very do-it-yourself, like very much do-it-yourself culture tinged the whole idea that we had for our project, I think. Kind of also plays into how the title came to be, because we named it We Almost Lost Bochum, which is not a title that a big production company would sign off, or it's, you know, it's kind of clunky, it's weird, it like raises a lot of questions, which I guess is good because people ask us about it.
Bochum's not sexy, that kind of, I can see that. Just
I
people
mean,
thinking that.
We thought it was kind of sexy because it's so like it's a fun element to it in a way. Because Bochum is not Detroit, Bochum is not Berlin, Bochum is
Bochum.
It's just Bochum. And the kind of understatement that informed a lot of Ruhrpott culture, we thought was really nice to like put it in this iconic, at least for music fans, iconic phrasing, which of course we nicked from We Almost Lost Detroit, which is a song by Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson, two people that we love dearly, of course. And of course, Gil Scott-Heron is kind of a predecessor to rap music in itself. So we thought it would be a nice, extremely niche, extremely nerdy music reference, which we just loved, and we knew that Pahel and Carsten and the whole group would also appreciate that kind of nerdy thinking. And it just raises a lot of questions. But you made a very interesting observation earlier when you said that this kind of the Rust Belt mentality, like the Rust Belt aesthetics that you see in, I don't know, West Virginia, that kind of translate to the Ruhrpott. We definitely also saw like a Michigan Ruhrpott connection there.
Yes.
In terms of aesthetics, in terms of like what happens if an extremely densely populated metropolitan area loses a lot of jobs. Like these kind of struggles are pretty much the same. And also the rap music from Detroit, I feel like there's a ruggedness to it that easily translates to what we see as emblematic for the Ruhrpott area. So all of these things came together, but mostly it was like an inside gag for us to just go like, hey, let's just call it We Almost Lost Bochum. And then it just, the more you repeat it, the more a project title becomes a real thing. And that the fun part is it just so happens that at one point I got to work together with Brian Jackson, who composed this song with Gil Scott-Heron. And like on the second day, I just told him like, you know what, I'm sorry, I have to bring this up. I'm working on a film and it's called We Almost Lost Bochum. And he's like, yeah, that's cool. That's fun. Do it. And that was like, that sealed the deal, so to speak.
Yeah, you get the stamp of, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and we knew we had it when we sat down to think of the real title.
Yes.
We sat there like, no, what could it be? What could it be? And I was, okay, let's go with the fun title we have for 1 year now. And
yeah, and I mean, it's a great title and it's a great documentary.
thanks.
And thank you so much for tuning in. First of all, I hope this was we hope this was a nice way to sort of, you know, divert your attention from everything else that's going on. And just so everybody knows, and also I'm saying this because we will have it as a recording and we'll put it up. The film will be available until Sunday evening, so please make sure that you watch it. It's a great film. It's in German cinemas right now, so it's very new. And so this is a really great opportunity for North America, everybody in North America, to be able to watch it. And yeah, I mean, thank you so much also to Benjamin and to Julian and to Pahel for joining me. It's been really fun to talk to you guys. And I have just one last little question, which is just, what are you listening to right now? Who are you liking right now?
You want to talk about City Girls?
Oh, I can, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a rap group from Miami, I believe, a duo called City Girls, two actual sex workers who rap very well and are extremely well produced and are just the best. There's also an MC that I always shout out from Brooklyn, who's originally from East New York, from Brownsville actually. His name is K.A. He's pretty much working as a firefighter. He's a New York City firefighter for the past 20 years. I think he's a captain. And he didn't put out any music until he was like in his late 30s, early 40s. And it's absolutely incredible. And he tried to hide it from his wife for like many years, but it's absolutely incredible. All his records are like, you know, if you have one, you can sell it for 300 quid or more, 300 bucks or more. So don't do that. Keep it, listen to it. Ka. Amazing.
City Girls and Ka. Who's
Yeah.
Just listen to that new Busta Rhymes just now. That was dope. That Vibes Cartel album was dope. Buju did that Upside Down 2020 was really good. Listen to PNL a lot. But I listen to a lot of Samba Pagode, Jorge Aragão, stuff like that. But it's all different type of music. Music, you can listen to everything. So it's German music. I don't know. I mean, Lachmann is definitely mentioned. Always have to mention my own people. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of German rap out. I'm unfortunately not in a position to talk about what they're doing right now because I don't listen to new German rap really.
You know, it's interesting you say that because I was just going to add real quick. It's always interesting because when I talk to people who are hip-hop artists or hip-hop enthusiasts, they always say, I love listening to everything. But when you listen to people who say stupid things like, I hate hip hop, I hate rap, they only listen to like 2 bands, you know, and I'm like, okay, I see a correlation. But when
There's
people,
so much.
yeah, but the hip hop folks are always like, I listen to classical, I listen to bluegrass, folk, you know, Mongolian throat sing, like everything, you know, like, and
Because we're digging for samples.
yeah, you gotta find
and
the next,
no, we just love music. Just
yeah,
love music.
yeah.
You know what, Raleigh, if you want to have a throat singer, there's an Inuit throat singer called Tanya Tarak, who is absolutely incredible from somewhere near Montreal in that area. I think she's Canadian. So that Tanya Tarak, she's absolutely incredible.
Tanya Tarak, okay,
Mhm.
yeah, because, yeah, that stuff slaps too.
Throat singing is your thing, like overtone throat singing, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down for listening to any of that stuff, I mean, because I have a similar, but yeah, so, yeah, it's been really great to talk to you all. I really appreciate you all taking the time to sit with us and have this conversation. Thanks again to my colleague Lena also for helping with the tech and behind the scenes. Thanks to everybody who was able to tune in. It'll be really fun to be able to, yeah, put this up on our YouTube and share it with folks because I think this is really, I think they'll have a lot of fun listening to this conversation. I've had fun having it. So, yeah, so thanks so much again to the 3 of you. And thanks to everybody who tuned in. And I'll let you all have any last words that you would like to say.
Well, thank you very much, Raleigh, for inviting us. Thank you very much, Pahel, for being who you are and letting us into your home. A very special shout outs to DC, to Detroit, to Atlanta, to Phoenix, to all these places. Even in Germany, we really appreciate these places right now.
Great.
Okay, I thank you, Raleigh, as well. I thank you, Julian and Benjamin and Yosha for making the movie. And definitely also thank you for to Goethe-Institut for their interest in our work. And yeah, let's hope for times to get better for everybody, not just for the right or the left, for everybody. All right.
Yeah, that's a good way to
All
end
right.
everything.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
night.
Have a good
Bye.
night.
Thank you, you too. Bye.
Bye.